We discussed the pragmatics of online concept construction, and within that construction we referred to listening as, we pointed to listening as one of the most important processes. I also tried to emphasize the pervasive character of loose use in communication. Within loose use, we can informally distinguish approximation when we say, for instance, 300 people instead of 299 people took part in the event. Then some loose extensions, like when I say I need a Kleenex instead of saying I need a disposable tissue, and perhaps some more original usages that can be called metaphors. So today we'll just focus on metaphors. The claim made by relevance theory is that no special mechanism is needed in the interpretation of metaphorical utterances. Mind you that in Grice's theory of conversational implicature, metaphor was regarded as a flout, so in fact the implicit assumption was that there was such a thing as some normative use, and then there was some kind of deviation, that is exploitation of the maxim or flout of the maxim. So here the position is different. Metaphor is just one more way of optimizing relevance. It is as legitimate as literal use. So no special mechanism is required. We simply follow the standard procedure of evaluating interpretive hypotheses in the order of accessibility. So the logical and encyclopedic information attached to the loosely encoded concept is sorted into two disjoint sets of properties, those which are part of the intended interpretation and those which are not. So perhaps you remember, because we called that process dropping logical properties. Okay, so those that are not included are simply dropped. So excluded properties are some logical or defining features of the encoded concept. So if we say Jane is such a princess, then what is excluded, what is dropped, is the feature a female member of the royal house. Now, given the symmetrical account of narrowing and loosening, an ad hoc concept formed from the encoded one contributes to the explicature, and the denotation of the new concept includes or overlaps with the denotation of the encoded concept. This is something that we have tried to demonstrate in the course of our previous lecture. Certain problems, however, arise with metaphors such as Robert is a bulldozer or Sally is a block of ice. So now let's just perhaps have a look at that type of metaphor. Robert is a bulldozer. So this is a conventional metaphor. The interpretation involves bringing together the encyclopedic entries for Robert and bulldozer. Mind you that they do not normally come in a subject-predicate relationship. The result is a wide array of contextual implications referring to Robert's persistence, obstinacy, insensitivity. When the ad hoc concept bulldozer is created, certain elements of the encyclopedic entry of bulldozer are carried over into the construction of the new concept, which, as the constituent of explicature, warrants the particular implicature derived. But mind you that the problem here is that such features as persistence, obstinacy and insensitivity are not the features of the linguistic or encoded concept bulldozer. So they are simply not there. Thus, features such as ruthlessness in pursuing one's interest, obstinacy, etc., do not feature in the entry of bulldozer. So if you check it in the dictionary, you will get a definition that it is tractor-like machine used for removing earth, rocks, rubble. Only human beings have such psychological properties as obstinacy, for instance, or ruthlessness in pursuing one's interests. The interpretation process involves bringing together the encyclopedic entries for Robert and Bulldozer. The first definitely helps in restraining the information selected for the second one, but the required information is just not there. Okay? So we simply do not have these features in the entry. Intuitively, properties of Robert interact somehow with properties of Bulldozer, thereby making highly accessible some properties which can be predicated of Robert. So, in other words, this is a tractor-like machine, and this tractor-like machine may be associated with certain features that human beings possess, but obviously this tractor-like machine is devoid of such features itself. The same problem arises with Sally is a block of ice. We know how to interpret it, we know what it means, but it's very difficult to explain how it is possible that certain properties that are associated with a block of ice are then taken to apply to Sally, even though these are not the properties characterizing a block of ice literally. So obviously, what you can observe in the case of Sally is a block of ice is an inferential process from the coldness of block of ice to the coldness of Sally, but this process trades on an equivocation in the meaning of cold. You do not know exactly what it means, and therefore it is not a valid inference. The relevant concepts in the encyclopedic entry of block of ice have themselves to be taken metaphorically. So, because it is not emotionally cold, you understand, a block of ice is not emotionally cold. So if we say that the block of ice is cold and then this is somehow transferred to apply to Sally, then it must be understood metaphorically. So we have metaphors within metaphors, loose use within loose use. So a predicate does not project unmodified from a non-metaphorical into a metaphorical context. Mind you that iron cannot, except metaphorically, be persistent, stubborn, or headstrong. The predicated properties are not eligible. They are simply not there. And now we have to solve the problem how, then, it is possible to process such metaphors. In contrast, I want you to consider the following metaphorical expressions. My son is a baby, Susanna is a princess, Bob is a soldier, Bob is a surgeon, Bob is a butcher, Bob is an artist, Bob is a magician. And mind you that my son is 30 years old now. Susanna is not a female member of the royal house. Bob is not a surgeon, nor is he a surgeon or butcher or artist or magician. Okay, so we have to conclude that since these are false sentences, the encoded concepts are used metaphorically. But mind you that in contrast to the examples previously discussed, all these can be literally true of the subject. Potentially it is possible that for a Bob to be a soldier, or to be a surgeon, or to be a butcher, or to be an artist, or to be a magician. Okay? If it is false, if he is not a surgeon, this is merely a contingent matter. Okay? He is not a surgeon because he is an engineer. But this is a contingent matter. It just happened like that. So, in other words, there is no category mistake. There is no violation of our naive metaphysics. We are not saying that he is a computer. Okay, or that he is a block of ice. So if it is mutually manifest that the property denoted by the encoded concept is not true, the process of encyclopedic sorting is applicable. Properties represented in the encoded concept for baby are literally true for some adults, But mind you that these properties are there. They are in the lexical entry for baby. So this is total dependence, demand for immediate attention, inability to consider other people's needs. And this is what you can find in the entry for baby. And you simply take those features and now apply those features to some adults. So, as you can see, in the case of contingent falsehood, the situation is pretty straightforward. You simply take something that is available and then you apply it to the new concept. Now, what we can say generally about metaphors is that the literal meaning is not what the speaker intends to communicate, but within metaphors we can distinguish two completely different cases. Those where the property could hold, so my husband is a baby, so this is what represents contingent falsehood, and those where it could not, because there is a crossing of fundamental type or category boundary. Sally is a block of ice, or Robert is a bulldozer. Two subclasses of the loose use: pure broadening and the combination of broadening and narrowing. Okay? A third possibility, for some cases of metaphors, the denotation of the two concepts do not intersect at all. So what is meant by this third paragraph? That before we have come across the category mistake type of metaphor, we distinguished pure broadening. So the lexical concept was included within the created concept, so the created concept was broader. The second type was broadening and narrowing, so intersecting circles. And now a third possibility arises, and this is what we call category mistake, that the denotations of the two concepts do not intersect at all. So let us see how it looks at the diagrams. So the first one is, the first picture represents pure loosening. So the outer circle stands for the constructed concept. The inner circle stands for the lexical concept or the encoded concept. So the encoded concept has to be loosened. So this is the example, he has a square face, for instance. You have to loosen the concept to drop one property, defining property, and then some other members can be included that do not possess this defining feature. The second diagram on the right, with two intersecting circles, represents that kind of metaphor in which broadening and narrowing have to take place at the same time. So this is, for instance, Tom is a bachelor, okay, or Sally is a princess. So Sally is a princess. She is not a female member of the royal house, so you drop out that feature, but you refer to only one particular category of princesses. It's quite likely that not all of them are spoiled. So these two circles intersect, so there is an overlap. And the third diagram at the bottom of the page represents category mistake. That is no common part, because they are characterized, the two concepts, the encoded concept and the constructed concept, possess completely different features. And these features cannot just straightforwardly be taken from one and put to the other. So this is the last type of metaphor that we have distinguished. So now one more time, here just pure loose use of the type the steak is raw or his face is square are not, this loose use is not mentioned, but the remaining two categories are presented. So this is a contingent falsehood example. Bob is a magician. In fact, Bob is not a magician, Bob is an engineer, but he can make wonderful meal out of nothing, and then I say, here's a magician. Then the second is a category crossing case, so Robert is a bulldozer or Sally is a block of ice. And this is the second type that is a bit problematic, because the question remained, as you remember, how is the move from the lexically encoded concept to the ad hoc concept possible? And here we can present two lines of thought. So the first line of thought comes from psychological investigations of the general human capacity for making analogies between quite disparate subject domains. So a crucial element will be here the mapping or alignment of the structures of the different domains. So for example, comparing the structure of the atom to the solar system. So this is how scientific analogies can be made. Or sound transmission compared to water waves. Now, but you can also notice that kind of mapping in children. So children can perceive relational correspondences between the domain of bird life and human life. So bird is interpreted as a person, and nest is interpreted as a home, and singing is interpreted as talking. So as you can see, this is a general human capacity for making such analogies. It cannot be restricted only to a scientific context. So the claim here will be that this capacity to perform this sort of relational mapping is a component, or maybe a component, of understanding certain metaphors. So if you look at the example, Ariel Sharon is a hawk. So a politician is compared to a bird, a very peculiar type of bird. So that might, in the interpretation of that metaphorical expression, might involve this structural mapping from the domain of birds to the domain of politicians. Okay, so this is a very fierce politician, because hawk is a bird of prey. So again, this is how we make these comparisons. And now the movement of a bulldozer and its effects on the environment may be compared to the behavior of some people and the effects of their behavior on other people. So particular correspondences are a bulldozer's indiscriminate clearing of material in its path, and this is compared to persons' insensitive overriding of other people's views and feelings. So this is just the process of finding analogies. This is what we call this relational mapping. The second line of thought that frequently appears in combination with the first one is the very popular view that there is a large number of pre-existing metaphorical schemes which play a fundamental role in structuring some of our more abstract concepts and which are readily available to the process of utterance interpretation. So, for instance, psychological force is a physical force. So it is believed to be a general scheme which helps to understand psychological phenomena. And obviously we can also compare it to our example with a bulldozer. Okay, so bulldozer represents a physical force, and then it just helps to understand psychological force. A more specific scheme, maybe, is involved in the interpretation of Robert is a bulldozer, and this is people are machines. Schemes are just constitute part of our conceptual makeup. So part of the role of the relevant encyclopedic information accompanying metaphorically used lexical concepts is to provide a connection with the appropriate metaphorical scheme. So the above are possible interpretations of how we understand category mistake metaphors, how we process them if we cannot simply take the properties from one concept, that is encoded concept, and apply it to the constructed concept, because they are not there. So now I believe these two explanations offer some kind of interpretation how it may happen. Now I would like to draw your attention to the difference between metaphors and similes. So on the one hand there is Mary is a bulldozer, on the other hand Mary is like a bulldozer. The implicatures might be the same, so Mary is understood to be obstinate, single-minded, insensitive to other people's feelings. The impact, however, is not identical. I believe that metaphors are more direct and therefore more forceful than similes. And now perhaps we should try to explain this difference in impact somehow, even though the implicatures are the same. So there must be some difference perhaps between these two in the way they are processed at the explicit level, not at the implicit level, if implicatures are said to be the same. So metaphors are false and similes are trivially true. I hope you understand that. So Mary is obviously not a bulldozer, but Mary is like a bulldozer. I guess it is always true, always trivially true, that in one aspect or another, one thing can always be like the other one. Okay? So a simile invites the addressee to make a comparison between two unlike things, whereas metaphor requires the addressee to conceive of one thing as actually being another kind of thing. So mind you that if we say Mary is a bulldozer, a specific concept is used. I mean, you have to create ad hoc, online, the concept of a bulldozer. Okay, so it is a circumstantial concept, constructed concept. Whereas, if you say Mary is like a bulldozer, you do not construct a concept, but the word bulldozer is used in its literal encoded meaning, because otherwise it wouldn't have any sense. It cannot be a constructed concept, because she is a bulldozer, so she is a constructed concept. That makes sense to say that, but it does not make sense to say that Mary is like this constructed concept. No, she is like a bulldozer, which is the encoded concept. So a metaphor involves construction of an ad hoc concept from the encoded concept, but no such process is involved in a simile. So in a simile, we just base our interpretation on the encoded concept, and that perhaps explains why these two differ in the final effect, because there is a difference in processing at the level of explicit meaning. So one more time, I just want to illustrate what I've already said. I want you to see that, in fact, in a simile, you must have an encoded concept but not a constructed concept. So it doesn't make sense if you say Mary is like a bulldozer, if it is not that bulldozer that you mean literary, if it is already constructed, because she is this constructed concept. She's not like this constructed concept. But you may say Mary is like a bulldozer. Mind you that if you say Mary is like a human being, does not make sense, because Mary is a human being. Mary is a particular human being, perhaps, but she's not like a human being. So this is a nonsensical sentence. You cannot say a pear is like a fruit. You can say that a pear is a fruit, but you cannot say that a pear is like a fruit. You can say that Mary is like a fruit, or Mary is like a pear, but you cannot say that pear is like a fruit. It does not make much sense. Okay, so Mary belongs to a particular category of bulldozers. She is not one. The oddity lies in saying of an entity which is a member of some category that it is merely like that category. So while a metaphor and its corresponding simile may communicate the same set of implicatures, the difference between them may be captured by the fact that an ad hoc concept is constructed as part of the explicit content of the metaphor, while the lexically encoded concept is preserved in the simile. Perhaps you remember that when we were discussing the process of implicating, we introduced two terms, strong implicature and weak implicature, strong communication and weak communication. So strong communication takes place when the addressee is heavily restricted in the choice of the interpretation. So there is just one implicature that he or she can derive. The speaker guides him in such a way as to somehow reveal just one possible interpretation. Now, weak communication, on the other hand, does not provide the addressee with one possible solution, but leads the addressee along certain paths of reasoning, which means that there might be numerous implicatures and no one of them specifically intended. Perhaps one of them is slightly stronger than the others, but actually there are many, many more, and they all combined give what Sperber and Wilson call poetic effect. So numerous weak implicatures, the whole richness of meaning, we may say. So metaphors involve weak communication. The intention is not to make strongly manifest some small number of specific assumptions, but to make a weakly manifest a wide range of assumptions. So we simply point to a particular conceptual space where various interpretations are to be sought. So if you think of poetry, for instance, you can notice that actually in poetry with numerous original, creative, condensed metaphors, the interpretations are pretty elusive, and there are many of them, and you're simply suggested a certain line of reasoning. So you go along certain lines, but nothing is as if imposed on you in your interpretation. So obviously that indeterminacy of the interpretation that is the effect of using metaphorical expression is not limited only to literal language, I mean to poetry. Metaphors, even if they are trivial, if they are common metaphors, trigger the same mechanism, activate the same mechanism. So metaphors always yield a wide range of weak implicatures. Then these implicatures are by their very nature indeterminate. The speaker has not singled out and endorsed any particular assumption, but simply encouraged the hearer to explore within the range of activated assumptions. Now, the hearer constructs an ad hoc concept and replaces the encoded concept in the explicitly communicated propositional form. The characteristic of indeterminacy must carry over from the implicatures of many metaphorical utterances to their explicatures. So once again, what I want to say here is that first, so there is an utterance with certain concepts, encoded concepts. Obviously, these encoded concepts are used to convey the meaning of ad hoc concepts, okay? And these ad hoc concepts can be frequently or are frequently expressed metaphorically. So the meaning that we derive from these metaphors is very frequently indeterminate. So we may say that this indeterminacy of metaphors used as ad hoc concepts is carried over to the whole explicature of that sentence. So it is not only the implicature that can be indeterminate, but also the explicature that may be indeterminate, as it inherits indeterminacy from loosely used ad hoc concepts. when we discuss the process of comprehension, it may appear from our discussion that it is a linear process, that we just accomplish one stage and then we proceed to another, and once it is completed then we proceed to yet another one. But it is not exactly that. In fact, there is a lot of forward and backward inferencing in the interpretation of an utterance, so it is sort of a simultaneous process taking place at various levels at the same time. I will be back to that vision of comprehension in a second, but I want you just to consider the following example. Let's go cycling. Where to? Holland is a picnic. So Mary and Peter are talking about their plans for holidays, and let's assume that one of them is just recovering from serious operation, but still wants to spend holidays actively. So perhaps cycling, but not in the mountains, so they are looking for a place where it will be relatively easy to cycle. So they think of Holland. Holland is a picnic in the sense that Holland is relatively flat, that there are no mountains there, so it won't be very tiring, very exhausting to ride a bike there. So once again, let's go cycling. Where to? Holland is a picnic. So mind you that Holland is a picnic involves a loosely used concept, picnic. Okay? But the interpretation of Holland is a picnic, the implicature that Mary may derive from Holland is a picnic is, let's go to Holland because it won't be difficult for us, it won't be tiring for us to cycle there. This is the implicit meaning, but to get this implicit meaning, first we have to derive the explicature from the explicature of the utterance. So we have to establish the propositional form of the utterance. In order to establish this explicature, we have to determine somehow the meaning of picnic, which is used metaphorically here, which is used loosely. So mind you that first you sort of get some kind of general implicature of that sentence, then you are back to this loosely used concept, and perhaps you somehow interpret it in a more precise way, if I may say so, and then you are back again to the final implicature and derive it in the form it is meant to be derived. So this is what is meant by this forward-backward inferencing. So you just first go to the implicature, then you're back to the explicature. You simply work upon this work, obviously in the quotation mark. You work on this precise, adequate interpretation of picnic, and then you proceed again to the final interpretation, that is final implicature. So before the hearer has a complete explicature, she accesses a variety of assumptions from the range activated by the utterance and treats them as potential implicatures. Okay, so first the interpretation of the sentence. Then there is a good deal of backwards inference in shaping the new concept, which will figure in the explicature and ultimately warrant a set of implicated conclusions. So then we are back to the concept of a picnic, and then once we determine the meaning of the concept of the picnic and establish the explicature of that sentence, we are back again to the implicit meaning, and now we derive it in this required form, so to say. Now, the indeterminacy that pertains to implicatures pertains also to ad hoc concepts. The relation between the concepts constructed by the hearer and that in the speaker's thought is one of resemblance rather than identity. So obviously, I assume that there is such a great deal of forward-backward inferencing, so adjusting different meanings, the concepts intended by the speaker cannot be exactly the same as a concept derived finally by the addressee. You remember they may slightly differ in their contextual resources, they may differ in their interpretations, but still these concepts are not identical but very much alike, so they resemble each other to a high degree. As it is our final lecture on the relation between words and concepts, I would like to repeat the same conclusions that we once derived when talking about the public lexicon and the mental lexicon, and when talking about ad hoc concept creation. So the encoded concept provides the starting point for a pragmatic process which results in a different concept, one which is narrower and or broader than, or simply different from the lexical concept. So these are all these processes: narrowing, loosening, narrowing and loosening, and then metaphorical use. Conceptual encodings do not seem to be really full-fledged concepts, but rather concept schemas or pointers to a conceptual space on the basis of which, on every occasion of their use, an actual concept is pragmatically inferred. The relation between sentences and thoughts is parallel to the relation between words and concepts. Natural language sentences do not encode sentences in the language of thought. They provide a template or a schema for constructing such language of thought, blueprint in other words. Linguistically encoded semantic representations are abstract mental structures which must be inferentially enriched before they can be taken to represent anything of interest. Yet they encode constituents of thoughts. These constituents of thoughts are all ad hoc concepts. So mind you that word meaning, in fact, involves concept communicating. We express ourselves by means of words, and with these words we communicate concepts. Thank you for your attention.